I lost everything in a single day. My job, my marriage, my family, gone before sunset. It started at 9:42 a.m. when my boss called me into his office and told me they were downsizing. I'd spent 16 years at that company, and he said it like he was ordering a sandwich. By noon, my desk was empty. By 5, my wife told me I was worthless and that she was taking the kids to her mother's for a while. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood there in the kitchen, holding my keys, staring at the woman who used to believe in me. The last thing she said before walking out was, "They deserve better than this." By 8 that night, I was sitting alone in a diner off Route 19, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My name's Daniel Reed, 41 years old, project manager for a construction firm that doesn't exist to me anymore. Married 12 years. 2 kids, Eli and Grace. I hadn't cried yet. I was too numb for that. The waitress kept asking if I wanted pie. I said no every time. I wasn't hungry. I just needed to not be home, to not see the hollow spaces where my life used to fit. That's when he walked in, an older man, late 70s maybe, wearing a gray jacket and a cap that looked older than I was. He sat down 2 stools away, ordered black coffee, and watched me for a while. I could feel his eyes on me, not in a creepy way, more like he recognized something. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "You look just like my son." I didn't answer. People say strange things in diners at night. But then he added, almost to himself, "He's been missing for 35 years. Something in his voice made me look up. His hands were trembling slightly, like the words had been trapped for decades and finally escaped. He studied my face for a moment longer, then leaned closer and said 5 words that froze me completely. "Your name is Daniel, right?" The fork slipped from my hand. I hadn't told anyone my name. Not the waitress. Not a single person in that diner. And that's when everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel. For a long moment, I just stared at him. The sounds of the diner faded, the clatter of plates, the low hum of conversation, even the hiss of the coffee machine. All I could hear was the echo of that question. How did this stranger know my name? He didn't look smug or dramatic, just tired. Like he'd been waiting a long time for something and wasn't sure what to do with it now that it had arrived. I asked how he knew my name. He said softly that he didn't. Not really. But the moment I walked in, something in his gut told him he should. His name was Frank Lawson. He said his son, Michael, vanished in 1988. Just gone. No note, no clues, no body. Police had searched, but eventually the case went cold. Frank had never stopped looking. Over time, he'd convinced himself that maybe Michael didn't die. Maybe he'd just started over somewhere else, a new life, a new name. And now, looking at me, he said he felt that same instinct, that same weight in his chest he used to feel when his son walked through the door. I didn't know what to say. My first thought was that he was confused, maybe sick. But then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an old, creased photograph. It was black and white, worn from being folded too many times. The man in the photo looked almost exactly like me. Same eyes, same jawline, even the same small scar near the temple I'd gotten as a kid from falling off a bike. For a second, I felt my stomach drop. I told him it couldn't be possible. I knew who I was. My parents were alive, both living 2 states away. But as I said it, something strange hit me, a sudden flash of memory that didn't belong to me. A road sign, a storm, someone shouting a name that wasn't Daniel. Frank said he didn't expect me to believe him. He just needed to ask one question. "Do you ever dream about water?" I didn't answer, but I did. Every night for as long as I could remember, drowning in a dark river I couldn't escape, reaching for a face I never saw clearly. That was the first night I realized my past might not be entirely mine. I left the diner that night with more questions than I'd ever had in my life. The air outside was cold, heavy with rain, but I barely felt it. Frank had stayed behind at the counter, sipping his coffee, watching me go like he wasn't sure I'd make it far. Driving home, his words kept replaying in my head. "You look just like my son. Missing for 35 years. Do you ever dream about water?" It sounded insane. But the problem was, it didn't feel insane. It felt familiar, like a melody I'd heard before but could never place. When I got home, the house was silent. My wife's things were gone. Her clothes, the kids' toys, even the framed photos from the hallway. Only empty nails on the wall remained. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the faint marks where the pictures used to hang. Then, for the first time in years, I remembered something, an image that came fast and sharp. A child standing by a lake, a hand reaching down, the sound of water rushing. Then, nothing, just darkness. The next morning, I called my mother. I told her about Frank, about the photo, about the scar. She went quiet, too quiet. Then she said she was busy and would call back later. She didn't. That silence said more than words ever could. By afternoon, I drove back to the diner, hoping Frank might still be around. He wasn't. But the waitress handed me a folded napkin. "He left this for you," she said. Inside was an address written in shaky handwriting and 6 words beneath it. "Come if you want the truth." The address was 2 hours north, in a small town I'd never heard of. Still, something in me needed to go. Not because I believed him, but because I couldn't keep pretending I didn't. That night, I packed a small bag, filled the gas tank, and drove. Every mile felt heavier than the last, like I was heading towards something I'd been running from my whole life. And deep down, I already knew, whatever waited for me at that address wasn't going to give me peace. It was going to change everything. The address led me to a town called Milford, a quiet place that looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. One main street, a faded gas station, a church with a leaning steeple. The kind of place people leave but never move to. Frank's address was at the end of a narrow road lined with oak trees. The house was small, old, with peeling paint and a porch that sagged like it was tired of holding on. His truck was parked out front. He was sitting on the steps, waiting for me. He didn't act surprised when I pulled up, just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting me all along. I asked him what this was about. He motioned for me to sit. Then, in that same calm voice, he told me about the night his son disappeared. It was July 12, 1988. Michael had gone fishing with his uncle near a river just outside town. There'd been a storm that night, strong current, lightning, high winds. When the uncle came back, the boat was gone. They searched for weeks. Nothing. No body. No answers. The official report said, presumed drowned. But Frank never believed it. He told me he'd spent years chasing dead ends, strange sightings, tips that went nowhere, dreams that wouldn't stop. Then, a few months ago, he found something that made him believe again. A DNA database. He'd uploaded his sample just to try, and a few weeks later, he got a hit. Partial match. A relative. Close. Too close to ignore. My stomach tightened as he spoke. I didn't want to understand what he was saying, but my mind did anyway. He looked at me then, eyes steady, voice quiet. "You weren't adopted, were you?" I shook my head. At least, I didn't think so. He said he wasn't asking to claim me. He just wanted a test. "If it's nothing," he said, "I'll never bother you again. But if it's something, if you really are him, you deserve to know." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The thought that my entire life, my childhood, my parents, everything, might not be what it seemed was too big to hold. But I nodded anyway, because even if I was afraid of the truth, I was more afraid of living without it. Frank handed me a small plastic envelope. Inside was a home DNA test kit, the kind you could buy online. He said he'd already done his part weeks ago and had the results pending. All he needed was my sample. His hands were shaking when he said it, but his voice stayed calm. I could tell this moment meant more to him than I could understand. I took the kit from him and stared at it for a long time. The swab felt like a trigger, a single motion that could detonate everything I'd ever believed about who I was. I finally told him I'd think about it, and he nodded, like he knew I would say that. Then he told me something that hit harder than anything else that night. He said, "When I saw you, I didn't think of proof. I thought of grace." I didn't understand at first. He explained that sometimes life gives you a second chance without asking if you're ready for it. That's what seeing me felt like for him. A second chance to say the things he never got to tell his son. I left soon after. The drive back was silent except for the sound of rain on the windshield. My thoughts were louder than the storm. Every detail of my childhood suddenly felt suspicious. My mother's nervous smiles when I asked about family photos, my father's quickness to change subjects whenever the past came up. I'd always assumed it was just how they were. But now I wasn't sure. When I got home, I found myself standing in front of an old box in the attic, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were family albums, birthdays, Christmas mornings, school pictures. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I noticed one photo where I must have been around 6. My parents were smiling beside me, but the background, somewhere near a lake, looked unfamiliar. That night, I took the DNA test. I sealed the envelope and placed it on my desk without sending it. It sat there for 2 days like a live wire waiting to burn through the silence. On the third morning, I mailed it. And for the first time since meeting Frank, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not guilt, just a quiet certainty that whatever was coming next, I couldn't hide from it anymore. The results took 12 days to arrive. 12 long, hollow days where every noise in the house felt too loud and every silence too deep. I kept checking my email like a reflex, though I already knew. Whatever the result was, it would change everything. During that time, my mother called once. She didn't ask about the test, but her voice carried that strange stiffness, like she was holding something heavy behind her words. She said she hoped I was doing okay after losing my job, that maybe this was a good time to reflect. I almost asked her if she remembered a lake, or a scar near my temple, or a boy named Michael Lawson. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to hear her lie. On the 12th morning, the email came. It was just one line, results available. Log into view. My hands trembled as I opened it. When I saw the percentage, the world went quiet. 99, 87% match. Paternal relationship confirmed. Frank Lawson was my biological father. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, feeling everything and nothing at once. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from a strange, aching clarity. Every memory of my childhood began to flicker like an old film, moments that didn't quite fit, gestures that now made sense. The fear of water, the constant moving when I was young, my mother's refusal to let me near lakes or rivers. When I finally called Frank, he didn't say anything for a full 30 seconds. Just breathed into the receiver like he was trying to convince himself I was real. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I knew it. I knew you were him." I drove to Milford that night. He was waiting outside, sitting in the same spot on the porch. He didn't hug me. He just looked at me the way people look at photographs they never thought they'd see again. Then he said something I'll never forget. "They told me you drowned that night." But I never believed it. Not once. I wanted to ask who they were, but he didn't answer. He just looked past me toward the trees and said quietly, "Your mother wasn't who you think she was." And with that, the story I thought I'd been living cracked wide open. For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. My mother, not who I thought she was. The words hung in the air like fog, too thick to see through. Frank motioned for me to sit, then went back inside. When he returned, he was holding a small metal box, the kind that used to hold old photographs or letters. His hands shook slightly as he placed it between us. He said there were things I needed to see, things he'd kept since the night I vanished. Inside were newspaper clippings, faded photos, and a few official documents from the sheriff's department. The articles told the same story. Local boy missing after river accident. My supposed death. My mother, not the woman who raised me, but another name entirely, listed as still missing. He explained that after the storm, his wife disappeared too. She'd taken the car and a few of Michael's belongings. The police assumed she'd drowned as well, swept away trying to find me. But Frank never believed that. He said she'd been growing distant for months, anxious, secretive. A week before the accident, she'd said something that haunted him ever since. If anything happens, it'll be for his own good. I stared at the box, trying to process it. My whole life had been built on a story someone else wrote for me. I asked Frank if he thought his wife, my biological mother, had kidnapped me. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, tired eyes reflecting the years he'd lost. Finally, he said, "I don't know if she was running from me or from someone else, but she made sure no one could find you." It was like the floor dropped out from under me. The woman I'd called Mom all my life wasn't just hiding the truth. She was the truth. The missing piece of someone else's tragedy. Frank reached across the table, his voice almost breaking. "You were never supposed to drown, son. You were supposed to disappear." That night, I drove back to the city in silence. The roads blurred beneath the headlights. My phone buzzed twice, calls from my mother. I didn't answer. For the first time, I wasn't sure which version of her would be on the other end, the one who raised me or the one who stole me. I didn't sleep that night. The city lights from the street cut through the blinds in thin, sharp lines, painting stripes across the wall. Every few minutes, I'd glance at my phone, still lighting up with missed calls. "Mom," the screen read. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Not yet. Not until I knew which part of her story was real. By morning, I drove to my parents' house, if I could still call it that. The driveway felt smaller than I remembered, the house quieter. She was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee already waiting for me, like she knew I'd come. She didn't act surprised when I mentioned Frank. She didn't deny knowing him either. She just exhaled slowly and said, "So he found you." Her calmness frightened me more than anything. I asked her who she really was. She said her name before Reed was Laura Lawson, my biological mother. She said she took me because she had to, because Frank wasn't who I thought he was. She claimed that after the storm, something changed in him, that he'd started talking about teaching me lessons, about how the world was dangerous and I needed to be rebuilt. She said he scared her, that he'd once locked her in the house for an entire day to keep her safe. She said that's when she ran, with me. Her version sounded desperate, broken, but she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She spoke like someone who'd already accepted the price of her choices. When she finished, I told her about the DNA test, that it proved Frank was my father. She didn't react. She just nodded, like she'd been waiting for that confirmation her whole life. Then she said something that cut deeper than anything Frank had told me. "You think I stole you, Daniel, but I saved you." She told me to stay away from him, that he'd never stopped searching, not because he missed me, but because he wanted control back. "He doesn't forgive," she said. "He rebuilds. People, places, everything. He'll try to rebuild you too." I wanted to believe her, but the truth had already split in two. Frank's grief and Laura's fear, both claiming to protect me, both hiding something. And deep down, I knew the only way to find the truth was to go back to where it all started, the river. The next morning, I drove back to Milford. The road stretched ahead like a scar through the forest, long, straight, and impossible to escape once you were on it. My head replayed every word from both of them, each one contradicting the last. Frank's quiet conviction, Laura's calm fear. Two people telling different versions of the same nightmare. And I was the proof they couldn't erase. The river wasn't hard to find. It lay just outside town, winding through the trees like a dark ribbon. The storm clouds were gathering again, low and gray, as if the sky remembered too. I parked near an old wooden bridge and walked down the embankment. The place was eerily familiar. The smell of wet earth, the rush of the water, the echo of something that had once terrified me. I stood at the edge, staring into the current, and for a second, it was like I could see it, the memory hidden beneath the surface. A boy's reflection, small hands clutching the side of a boat. A woman shouting his name. A flash of lightning. Then silence. Behind me, tires crunched on gravel. Frank's truck. He stepped out slowly, rain starting to fall around him. He said he knew I'd come here, that I'd have to. He told me this was where everything ended, and where it could begin again. I asked him if he'd hurt her, Laura. His face tightened, but he didn't answer right away. Finally, he said she'd been unstable, that she'd made up stories to justify what she'd done. "I loved her," he said, "but she took you from me. She made you forget who you were." Then he asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Who do you believe, Daniel? The woman who vanished with a lie, or the man who's been waiting for you to come home?" Lightning cracked across the sky. For a moment, his face looked different, hollow, almost pleading. But there was something else in his eyes too. Control. The same quiet power Laura had warned me about. I told him I didn't know who to believe. He nodded once, almost gently, and said, "Then you'll have to remember for yourself." And before I could respond, he stepped closer, toward the edge of the river, and said something that chilled me to my core. "Maybe you were never supposed to survive that night." The rain came harder, thick sheets beating against the riverbank. Frank stood at the edge like a man facing judgment. His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The words were too heavy for volume. "Maybe you weren't meant to survive," he said again, eyes fixed on the water. "Maybe that's why nothing ever fit right for you." I froze. For a moment, I couldn't tell if he meant it as guilt or revelation. He turned toward me, rain running down his face, and continued, "You were supposed to be with her. That night, I tried to stop you both. She was leaving, taking you. I thought she was confused, that she'd hurt you. I was wrong." My stomach clenched. I asked what he meant. How could he stop her? He said he followed them to the river, shouting, trying to make her come back. The storm was bad. The boat tipped. I saw her fall in. I reached for you, but you... He stopped himself, eyes dark. You hit your head. You went under. I thought I'd lost you both. He said he searched for hours until the current grew too strong. When rescuers came, they found nothing. He said when the police called off the search, he refused to believe it. I told myself if you were alive, you'd come back. And now you have. But something in his voice felt off, too calm, too rehearsed. I asked if he'd ever told anyone what really happened. He said no. The official story was enough. People forgive loss, he said. They don't forgive mistakes. A flash of lightning illuminated his face, and I saw it. Remorse tangled with something colder. I stepped back, heart pounding. The memories that had haunted my dreams returned all at once. A hand pushing, not reaching. A shout not of warning, but anger. The water-swallowing sound. He saw it in my eyes. Knew I remembered. He whispered, I didn't mean to. I didn't answer. I just turned away, walking back up the slope through the rain. Behind me, I heard him call my name, voice breaking, but I kept going. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking, soaked, but clear-headed for the first time in months. Some truths don't heal. They just stop the bleeding. I drove until the rain faded, until the road ended. Then I parked and sat in silence. My life hadn't started in that river. It had been rebuilt beside it, out of lies, fear, and survival. And now, finally, I understood who I was. Not Michael Lawson, not Daniel Reed, just the man who walked away from both. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.